called Acme Consulting. We have Bob, our QA engineer. We have Katie, our developer. We have Jill, our manager. They're working with a client, World Class Coffee, with Bill, their client. We want Bill to be nice and happy. But one day, Bill calls up Jill after another bad release. Bill's not happy at all. Bill's complaining, you're taking way too long to deliver products to me. You're giving me too many bugs and you're costing me money. I've had this conversation with clients. It's not pleasant. Jill, rightly so. Oh no, we're so sorry. Let me get this fixed. Back to the office Jill goes. Calls together Bob and Katie. Houston, we have a problem. Bill is really angry at us. We're about to lose him as a client. We need Bill as a client. We're taking too long to deliver our products. And we're giving him far too many bugs. We need to fix this. Why is stuff escaping our QA department? Bob, help me out. Jill, we are doing the best that we can. We have limited resources. There's like 12 developers and 2 of us. And just to do our happy path testing takes us days. Days. Every single time you ask us to do a release, we're spending 2 to 5 days doing regression testing. We're not even getting to do all the other testing that you're asking for. We really need some help from the developers. We need them to do better testing. We need to get out of the happy path game. Whoa, Bob. Let's back up here a little. Not the blame game. We're testing as much as we can. We're not QA either, though. And we're just as resource constrained. This is how our conversations always seem to go with QA and dev for whatever reason. Thankfully, Jill brings it back together. Can we automate any of this? What are our options? The answer is always maybe, if we can find the right tool. We can find one that's not developer focused. Most of their QA departments, they're not developers. Last thing they want to do is turn into developers. So they need a product that's easy for them to use. They need one that doesn't create brittle tests. If I update a feature, all the test cases that don't apply to that feature shouldn't magically break. We need it to be fast to create tests. If it's not fast and takes forever to create our test, we're never going to do it. And we need to be able to run them quickly. Unfortunately, we haven't found a tool yet. We keep looking. Thankfully, like all good developers, Katie might be able to help out with this. We're always looking at new tools, and she's been hearing a lot about Cypress. They're touting it as faster, brittle resistant, easy to create tests. However, automating tests, it's going to take longer, but it will reduce our QA time. While at the same time, it's going to increase our confidence in our releases. Bob's a little worried, but what am I going to do? If you reduce the QA time and you automate everything, what's left for me to do? Bob likes his job. Bob needs his job. Katie's got an answer, thankfully, because there's plenty of work. There's stress testing. There's exception testing, security testing, accessibility, using the UI in weird and unexpected ways. It's amazing how crazy people get with UIs, especially users. Bob can simulate a lot of that. You can write tests. Oh, Bob's relieved. There is a lot of work. There's a lot of work for me to do. But what it really comes down to is Jill. Jill, we need to give you to give us time to actually do our testing. Jill's ready. We're done. We're good. Let's do this testing. Let's do it before we lose Bill. That conversation is the exact conversation that my team had with our customers. It's the exact conversation developers and QAs have had. We've had that conversation back with managers. I've had it with multiple teams. And we're going to talk about how do we actually make this easy. That's what Cypress is going to allow us to do. Justin James, I've been a web developer for the greater part of 20 years, and this is the first time ever, and I mean ever, I've actually been excited to do automated web UI testing. I do testing because it's a necessary evil, but we've always stayed away from the website of it. We've always tested our APIs, tested our databases, tested our deployments. We stayed away from the UI because it was hard. It was brittle. None of us enjoyed doing it. I'm actually excited to do it. I'm actually pushing my manager right now as a senior architect to let me go off and do a bunch of automated testing. We're hiring a couple contractors. I'm like, give those to me. Let me get this automated testing done for us. I'm excited to do it for once. I'm also in the DevOps space. Long before DevOps was actually a phrase in the industry, I've been doing CI, been doing CD, automated testing. I haven't done a manual deployment in probably 16 years now. Everything has been scripted out. Everything's been automatically run, whether it's on a nightly build, whether it's on every checkout or check-in. And Cypress fits perfectly in that space, and I'm going to show you how. I also do Scrum Master work on Microsoft MVP. I founded a company called Let Your Nerd Be Heard. Hopefully some of you got to see the presentation talk I did at 11 today. I hope people like yourselves get up on the stage and have fun doing this. I'm an award-winning entrepreneur, and I'm an Amazon #1 best-selling author. But enough about me. Let's get back to testing. This is the standard testing pyramid that we typically see. End-to-end testing is the smallest bit at the very top. They're normally the most expensive. They're normally the hardest to set up. Then we get a little bit more with integration tests where we start to mock some stuff out. Unlike the end-to-end where we don't mock anything, it's a full deployment. Integration mocks a little bit, and then unit test mocks everything out. They're the fastest to run. They're typically the easiest to write. So typically we do this pyramid. Not in the UI space. UI space is a little different. We're going to start integration test as our biggest bucket. We're going to turn our funnel upside down. 70% integration. We can mock all of our API calls out. We can start working on interactions, working on behaviors in the UI. We still need some end-to-end testing, so we'll bump it up a little bit. And the smallest piece in the UI space is unit testing. We don't have a ton of business logic typically in our UIs. Most of it is presentation logic. That's the integration test. Because our goal, let's test our interactions and our behaviors. If I click on a button, does it do what it's supposed to? Does it show the user the right things? If I have form validation, does my validation pop up with the right messages, the right colors, and the right positions? That's the stuff I care about in the UI. That's the stuff I don't get right, my users are going to complain about. And that's what Cypress is going to allow us to fix. And Cypress is our next generation front-end testing tool. The biggest part about it, it's not constrained by Selenium. Typically when we start talking automated web UI testing, we're in the Selenium realm. And everyone goes, oh, yeah, it's Selenium. I don't really want to use it, but I have to. Oh, why is that? There's 3 reasons. First, speed. Selenium's a little bit slow at times. Part of that's how it works. It leaves your machine, goes all the way out to the network, comes back in even if everything's running locally on your machine. It also runs outside of the browser. So it doesn't know a lot of the things like, is my page loaded? Is my element currently animating? Do I need to wait for an API call or a network call? So we're putting lots of wait cycles into these things. We're having to wait for all of that. Selenium also has a little bit of flakiness to it because of those wait cycles. I have to hope I put a long enough wait in for my element to show up on the page. If today I put in 1 second and then my machine for whatever reason is under load, and now it takes 2 seconds, kind of screwed. I only told it to wait 1. It tries to run my test and says, sorry, your element wasn't there. It gives a lot of flakiness to it. Cypress knows all of those things. It runs in the browser space. It knows when my pages are loaded. It knows when elements are done animating. It knows when I'm making a network call and when the call is done. I can also intercept all of those network calls. That's what allows me to make integration test as my biggest bucket. I can take every one of those API calls, tell it, here's the response I want you to return instead of making a real call to the API. This makes it super easy to do exception testing. I can return back a failure. I can mock out every failure that my API might return and see what the UI does. I don't have to try to get my data in the right spot. I don't have to try to force an error out of the API. I don't have to try to force a certain user to be able to log in so that they can see right data. I can mock all of that stuff out. It also uses jQuery for all of its selectors. You don't have to have jQuery as a dependency on your project, though. It's a Cypress-only dependency. You never will deploy jQuery unless that's needed for your application. But all of us have done jQuery at one time or another, and if you haven't, there's so much documentation on jQuery that within a few seconds you can find a Google result that's relevant to get the exact selector that you want. Makes it really easy to make good tests that aren't flaky. The debugging is amazing in Cypress. We have time travel debugging. Every single step that I tell it to do, in the UI, I can go click on it and see where was the UI at that particular step. When I tell you to find an element, it'll highlight what element it found. Told you to click on it, it'll put a little red dot over the element for us. Makes an XHR call, or AJAX, or API calls. I can see what the actual network response is for that. I can look every single step of the way and trace through it. When I run it from the command line, it creates videos for me so I can see what was my test actually doing. I can pinpoint my failures. Really easy to do debugging. So let's look at an actual example here, and hopefully the internet plays nicely with me. So the application that we're going to play with today is a to-do application. It's got a few pages. Our home page, we can add in new items here. You can see it's got some validation here. Must have at least 3 characters. Must type something in. I can check off items here. When I check them off, they actually move to the bottom, become grayed out. I can toggle this. I can go ahead and delete it. It'll pop up and say yes, no. If I hit cancel, it just stays. If I say OK, off it goes. I can log myself out. I got a login page. I've also got a sign up page and navigation between the two. And I got a 404 page here. So we're going to actually look at all the tests it takes to automate this. So when you run Cypress, from the command line, you do npx cypress open. And it gives you a little UI like this, shows you all of your testing files. And when you click on run, it opens up a window like this and will kick off all of your tests here. It's about 25 tests. This is automating all the stuff in the UI. Does all my validation checking, does all of my navigation, checks my menus in the right order, checks that I can log out, I can log in, I can sign up, I can add to-do items, all the stuff that I showed. And it's going to run in about 30 seconds. And as soon as it's done, we'll look at time travel debugging. So we can see, went through everything. I have confidence in 24 seconds that my whole UI is doing exactly what I expected to do. If I make changes to the UI, kick off the test again. It's going to has a watcher. It's going to immediately rerun all of these tests. And if I just click on one, like this one looks at the navigation. It goes from the login to the sign up page. It's going to basically click on this create account link that's down here. So first thing you do in a Cypress test, you actually visit a page. So I'm visiting my login page. I'm going to check my path name. I want to make sure I'm actually on the login page. I navigate to the right spot. Make sure I don't have any funky query strings at the end of it or extra text. You can see it highlighted in the yellow at the bottom there, my actual link. This is my getting of my element. It shows me immediately what it found. It checks here, does it have certain things? Does it actually have text called create account? When I click on it, I get a little red dot in it so I can see what did I actually click on. Then off it goes to a new URL. And it's subtle because the page looks very similar, but now I'm on the sign up page. I can see where I navigated to. So you can start to see how easy it is to do debugging and see what the test actually did. If any of these failed, I can step all the way through it. Now if I pick something down here that actually does like some adding. So this one actually adds in a new to-do item. Let's look at so we can see our home page has nothing in it. We're going to actually post some stuff up here, and it's going to get added in. If I open up the Chrome debug tools here, we'll just zoom this in a little, and I actually click on my XHR request. This is my API call. I can get every bit of data about that API call. If I go click on and say the button for adding, it shows me what was the actual button. I can see my HTML here. I can start digging into seeing what the selectors were. Really easy to do a lot of easy debugging here. I can also do stuff like set my viewport. Right now it's set to 1200 or 1280 by 720. I could change that on a per test basis. I could change it across the board. I set mine globally at this size, but say I wanted to do responsive test. I just started at the beginning of the test, say Cypress.viewport. Here's my width and height, and it's automatically going to resize this viewport. Really easy to do all of these different tests. And coding-wise, the code is not much to it. When you actually create a project and add Cypress onto it, it creates this Cypress directory for us. And testing looks pretty familiar if you've played with a lot of the testing frameworks. There's a describe, right? It's a group of tests. We have our it, which is our actual test. Then we do work. Everything's based off of CY. It's short for Cypress, so CY dot, and then I can chain a bunch of stuff together. First thing every test is always going to do is I'm going to visit some page. I have to visit a page in order to test a page. If I want to test the path name, say, go get my location, my path name here, and then call the should statement. This is where we get into our asserts. So it should equal /unknown if I navigate to the 404 page. And then I can start getting elements on the page. So cy.get, get will get me an element. One way to make your test not brittle is by adding an attribute like this. Data-cy is on all of my HTML elements. That's not going to change. If I looked at IDs, I looked at classes, those are going to potentially change. Designers are always renaming CSS classes, so it's potentially adding new ones on there. But data-cy is an attribute, you know it's strictly for testing. I'm never going to change it away from that. So it makes it easy to do less brittle test. Let's pull up one other case here. So I talked about mocking out some stuff. Just got the top of the file here. So in order to actually do mocking, we have a .server. This says start listening to my network calls. I have a route, so I mock out all of my routes. If I just want to listen to the actual call to the route, I just give it the URL, and I don't give it the rest. And it'll actually do a real call. In this case, I'm going to say, every time I call /to-do, return a status code 200, make it of type post, and this response is going to be the actual JSON response back. So this is what it actually looks like. This is what my API actually returns back when I add a new to-do item in here. Then the last piece that's in here is this as statement. This is how I can do aliases so I can refer to it later. So later on, if I scroll down far enough, I say go visit the home page and go and wait for whatever API calls I need to make. Even as a mock-up, it'll wait for those things to finish. I can have as many of those as I want in here, and then I can do my actual work. So you can start to see how building up our test isn't that difficult anymore. We've solved the software problem. Doing all of the tests for this demo app, even learning Cypress, was about 2 hours of time. Their documentation's fantastic. They're responsive on Twitter. Anytime I had questions that I couldn't find in the docs, hit them up on Twitter, and I had a response fairly quickly. Other stuff we can do here is typing in a text box. .type, give it the text we want. You can also put in enters, you can put in tabs. There's a couple other special characters you can put in there. I want to click on something, simple as .click. You can even do stuff like mocking out that confirm box. To say, first time I click on it, go ahead and return false back, and also check what is the text that shows up in that box. It should say, are you sure you want to delete? Second time through, should still have the same statement, but this time we're actually going to delete it. So now I can write a test case where the first time I check what happens with the cancel button, make sure I didn't accidentally delete it. Then I can check what happens when I click the OK button. The other thing that you'll notice here, and when I go back to these tests, all of these run in order. Unlike unit tests, where they can run in any given order and they're not dependent on each other, you can create stateless tests, and you typically do when you're doing UI testing. I don't want to have to log in every single time in order to go to the home page. If I've logged in once, I can build up my home page as long as I build it in the right order. Add myself in an item, then I can complete the item, then I can delete the item. It's all about doing it in the right order, and that also helps getting my test cases much faster. If I change it to login every time, it's like 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes to do the login before every test. So I can get these stateful test cases in order is done by the order that they're in the file. So whatever order my it statements are in is the order my test cases will run. See, I think we want to hit this one. Maybe. I'll see what this one is. I have a bunch of videos in here that were in case the internet did not work. So we'll skip that one. This is the video we want. So how do you actually install Cypress? It's an npm package. npm install --save-dev Cypress with a lowercase c. Off it goes. All of us wish npm was this fast, the magic of speeding up videos. And then npm audit if it shows up. I always run it. Lodash was the culprit in this case. So we'll let that run. And then we're going to start up Cypress. It's going to be npm-x Cypress open. Very first time you run it, it goes through and verifies, do I actually have the UI? When I did my npm install, it just downloaded the framework so I can do development work. First time I ran it, it made sure I could actually execute it. So ultimately in a moment, we're going to see this UI come up that we have already seen. You'll also notice there's a slew of test cases in there. So we're going to pass by that test, and we'll come back to that video. But when you add Cypress in initially, what you get is this example folder. So my other project, because it's an actual real project, I didn't need the examples to stay in there. But it has 105 examples that they actually run through. So if I kick that one off, see if I can kick this one off here. npm-x Cypress open. They have a whole example website that they've written, and that's what the test cases are against. So we'll wait for that thing to pop up, and in the meantime, I'm going to pull up the example website. One thing to be really aware of, like pretty much every test runner framework that opens up a Chrome tab, I totally could navigate in here. They even give me a warning that they're automating the browser and you shouldn't. And the minute I stop running the Cypress, it's going to kill that instance, and your other tabs will go away. But the kitchen sink demo that you see it run through all the test cases, this thing actually has pretty much everything you can do with Cypress with documentation here. So if you pick like querying, it's got all kinds of examples of the different ways that I can actually query an element. I can do it with hashtag, I can do it by classes, so IDs by classes. How do I test should contain, get the first buttons. So there's tons and tons of examples in here for navigation. If I click on the menu, I got traversals, actions, windows, network requests, everything you can think of with Cypress. They call it their kitchen sink demo. And that's what these test cases are actually going to go through and test. They're going to make sure everything shows up right. So let this thing kick off here. We'll see if I can get two of them running at the same time. Okay, it's thinking hard about that. Let's just run this video. So npm-x Cypress open, and this is going to show the example website. If you have questions, feel free to put them on Slack. If you're in the room, feel free to just shout them out at me, and I will repeat them for everyone else and get to them. You can see it running through all the time traveling stuff that we saw, all the tests we saw. Just tons and tons of fantastic code here. I've opened many of these files when I'm like, oh, I need that similar kind of a thing. The code is very well documented. And so you can see 105 tests. It's going to run through all of those. And from a coding perspective, it is well documented. So if I pick like the querying spec, like here, you can see it talks about how it's actually going to get elements. I can get all the text in here using CSS collectors, just like you do in jQuery. So very well documented. Cut and paste. There's 105 cut and paste examples that you can actually run through here. Easy way to actually get up and running. So how do we actually configure some of this stuff? So I mentioned the viewport. In the root of your project is a Cypress JSON file. couple key things. There's lots of things you can put in it, but a couple key points. Viewport width by default is 1,000, and the viewport height is 600. The base URL makes it so every time I say cy.visit, I don't have to go ahead and append on an actual URL in there. So if this changes to a different environment, all I have to do is update the JSON or the Cypress JSON file, and all of my tests will still run and point to a new URL. Blacklist host says, don't try to go and actually get these files. This really becomes important when you're behind a proxy server. When we get to the gotchas section, we'll talk a bit about proxies, but right now it doesn't work great through proxies. And there's some issues with trying to get stuff like fonts.google APIs, stuff that's outside of localhost. So you can blacklist all those URLs so it doesn't wait 30 seconds before it times out. Yep, so here we got a couple questions on Slack. So go for it. I will cover, can it be used in browsers other than Chrome? I will cover that in a bit. Got it. So does the website need to be written in anything special in order to use Cypress? The answer is no. If it runs in the browser and you can get access to the elements with jQuery, you can do all of the testing. The one exception to that is iframes. They have limited support for iframes. If your site happens to use iframes, there is a built-in security model there that intentionally doesn't really allow you to get to a lot of the DOMs elements within iframes. But if you don't have iframes, then it will, as long as you can get it in the browser, it will work. Any questions at all in the room? Okay, DevOps. How do we get it working in a DevOps CI/CD environment? Because really where this becomes super useful is every time I do a pull request, a merge to master, I want to actually run my test. I want to validate everything is still working, validate I don't have regression test. So first thing we want to do is compile our code in production mode. I'm in the Angular space. I don't have to compile my code in production mode to actually start it up and run Cypress test. But we've run into issues where we haven't run our test against the production, the bundled minified version of our code. When you run the bundled minifier, sometimes it looks for stuff. If you misspelled something, it's not as forgiving. It goes, I don't know what to do with this. I'm trying to minify stuff. I can't figure out what to do. We want to catch those. You have to start your web server up. Cypress does not start a web server up for you. So it's up to you to figure out how to start your web server up. I'm going to cover how I do it in the Angular space, but there's many options. You could start it up in Nginx. You could start it up with the Angular ng-serve. You could start it up with Apache. You could start up with HTTP-server, as long as you can get the server started. Then we're going to run our Cypress test. Then we need to kill our web server. It's a headless environment. We don't want a long-running process out there. We're going to start our server up. When we're done testing, we want the server to go away. So in the Angular world, 3 packages. Only one of them is Angular specific. Angular-HTTP server. I've used HTTP-server as well. The difference between the two is Angular HTTP server has fallback routes. So if I can do deep linking, which means if I go to my URL/login, it knows how to get to that page. The HTTP server didn't know how to get to that page. I had to start at the home page and navigate through a link to get to all my subpages. But it starts up a server for me. npm run all has 2 options. I can run stuff in parallel, and I can run stuff serially. And it's cross-platform. I don't have to worry about, did I get 1 ampersand, 2 ampersands, is it a semicolon because you're running in PowerShell? Is my Mac guy on my team going to actually be able to use all of my scripts? I don't have that worry. And the last piece, start server and test. I give it a command to start up my web server. I give it a URL to go ping with the get command. Once it gets a response, then it goes and runs my test. And when it's all done, it stops the web server for me so I don't have to worry about it. There's a bunch of scripts that I put in my package.json to make this actually happen. So run-s is that npm run all. I could run this in a mix of serial and parallel. The reason I'm running it all in serial is for my logging. When I run it in parallel, I get a mix of my linting log along with my testing, along with my builds, and if something fails, it's a pain in the butt to read that log file. Running obscurely, I can just easily read the log file. I like to lint all of my stuff. Angular has a built-in linting command. For unit test, I need to run them as a single run. Angular has ng test. I tell it -- watch equals false, get myself a single run, and then I want to run it in the Chrome headless browser. Again, we're running in an environment where there's no user interaction. I want everything to run from the command line. I don't want it to pop up a single UI. The minute I pop up a UI is the minute I have a risk that it will get hung up, and I'll have to log into the server at some point and kill it to get stuff moving forward again. Everything in the command line, Chrome headless. Do my ng build -- prod to get my production build. Now we get start, server, and test. I give it a CI serve command. It says go run that HTTP server. Here's the path where my build is, and I want to start it on port 4200. It comes back, does a localhost :4200 get command. Once that successfully returns, now I can run Cypress. Cypress run. This is the command line, an instance of Cypress. I also pass in a configuration to turn off videos. In my CI environment, I don't have the ability to get to the videos. I have to upload them to an Amazon bucket. It's a demo application. I don't want to pay for an Amazon bucket to upload demo unit or demo UI test. So I turn off the videos. But we'll look at what those videos are. Because if your CI environment lets you get in there, they're great to have on. So let's take a look at a video here. npm run CI, we're going to see it go off. It's going to run our linting command here. So you should always lint your code. This is a nice way to not fight over style guidelines amongst your team, especially if you have a framework like Angular that builds in all of the linting rules. We're going to run all of our unit tests. So we'll see this thing fly through our unit test. And it does take a bit of time. It takes about maybe 2 minutes for this build to actually run. But it's way faster than if I try to do this by hand. Again, if you have questions, ask them on Slack. If you have them in the room, just... You got any questions? I used REST commands to set up and tear down my data for test. Yes, you can make network requests just like I mock the stuff out. You can also do cy.request is the actual thing, and you give it that REST command and all of the data, and you can pipe that up in there. You could also run a script to do that same command and then have your Cypress stuff run afterwards, like that npm run s or that run -s. Your first command could be everything to do your setup of data, and then your second one could be go now and run the Cypress test. So the question is, I run a single page app and the URL is always the same. I have not run into that scenario. Every spa that I have played with has every route you go to puts it onto the actual URL, and you can see that if I go back here and look at our demo app. You can see as I click through the pages, it might be a little tough to see precise, but now it says login, now it says sign up. So my URLs do change. If they don't change for whatever reason, then yes, you're going to have to either create one long test, or you're going to have to create a test that's just a page of links to get to your individual pages, and you start there and then click on the link. Other questions? So they tried to use Cypress to test Salesforce, and I'm not sure there's a solution for that. If you can get access to the elements in the browser, the tough part about testing a third-party app is you don't control any of the HTML elements, so you can't add like a data-cy onto it. You have to look for classes. You have to look for either traversing down the element tree or the DOM element tree. Somehow you have to be able to get to those elements, and if they change them, then your tests are a little bit brittle. But you should be able to navigate right to the right page and get down into where you need to be. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't necessarily work, but I'm not a Salesforce developer, so I'd have to actually look at that to see that specifically. So let me go right back to the end of this, if I can get right to the end of the test. So the end of our CI test, we get all of our test results here. We can see it ran, looks like the very last one actually ran 6 tests, because that's the very last piece in here. See if I can get the final. Oh, I didn't leave enough room there. But at the very end, it gives us a wrap-up table, basically. It tells us every single test file, how many tests ran, how many passed, how many failed. And it also creates us some videos. So let's look at let's pop one of these videos up. So the same thing that we saw in the actual UI, this is what it records for us in the videos when you run it from the command line, so I can see exactly what it was doing here. It's really nice that it automatically will create those for us. It just throws them into a video folder. So obviously from a source control standpoint, my gitignore ignores the video files. The other thing I didn't mention is we can also do screenshots. So in the actual sample test, when it ran, it actually created a screenshot for us. I have no clue how to zoom in on that one. But essentially, wherever it was at that time, I can do the screenshot piece. The piece that it does not do, it doesn't do screenshot comparisons for us. There's multiple products out there that will do that. I know Cypress has done some webinars recently with a company called Proxy, where they did screenshot testing. They took a screenshot. Every time you ran your test, it took the screenshot, compared your gold copy. Proxy gives you the ability, it looked like, and I watched the webinar, so that's the only uses of Proxy I have, but it looks like you can actually say, oh, these two changed, I want to approve the new change, or was this truly a failure? So you can actually do layout changes. Because or layout tests, none of these tests are checking my layout. They're checking that whatever element I told it to click on here, which I have no clue what that element would actually be because there's nothing technically right there. But whatever element it was, did it find it on the page? It doesn't say, did I find it in the right spot? So Percy's a way to do layout testing by screenshots. I've also seen some NPM packages for it. I haven't tried any of that stuff out. I've been more concerned with behaviors over layouts at this point. So some gotchas. Somebody asked about browsers. It currently is Chrome only. To me, this is the #1 thing holding Cypress back. If Cypress worked in all the other browsers as well, we would see a mass takeoff of this. They are actively working on it, but they've been working on it for a bit, and they don't have a timeline of when that's going to come out. For my team, we were willing to live with the Chrome only restriction. At least we had one browser, and it was Chrome, so if it worked in Chrome, like 80 to 85% of the stuff worked in all the other browsers. Yes, IE11, if you still have to support it, some stuff might not work. Older Edge, some stuff might not work. But if we can get 85% of the way there, that means that my QA department doesn't have to do that 85% as a manual test in every single browser. They can focus on that last percentage that we can't actually get automated. They can focus on all the other stuff that we need them to do, like exception testing. Like that's a big thing in my world. I'm in a security group. We've got to make sure our exceptions are correct and our security model's right. It takes them a lot of time to set that up. I can automate a lot of that. You might see some documentation in Cypress that you can use TypeScript to create all of your test cases. Unfortunately, it's not quite as baked as the JavaScript side. I tried it out. I was like, I'm in Angular. Everything's in TypeScript. I should use TypeScript within Cypress. So I went down that route, and I kept running into roadblocks, just random roadblocks that weren't documented that I had to figure out how to work around. Cypress has something called custom commands, basically reusable commands. If I'm doing the same thing over and over, I can put it into a function basically and call it like Cypress dot, whatever my command name is. On TypeScript, I had to know, oh, I got to go find the global namespace. I've got to add it to the interface. I've got to set up all this work. And JavaScript, it just worked. Then that whole Windows pop-up for confirming do you want to delete, turns out until the latest release, they had forgot to actually stub that out in the TypeScript piece. So you got an interface doesn't exist error. I was like, enough with it. Back to JavaScript. It just worked. And all of their examples and all of their documentation is 100% in JavaScript. They didn't have any TypeScript examples other than the page that said, how do you hook up TypeScript? If you're behind a proxy server, by default it doesn't work. The way to get around that is to actually add an environment variable called no_proxy, and you put localhost in there, or whatever your URL is. In my case, it's localhost. I'm running all of my test cases from the same machine that Cypress is on. Once you do that, though, that's where the blacklist that we talked about earlier comes in. It doesn't send anything through the proxy server anymore. I know they are actively working on this. I've seen some cryptic tweets come from them that says, in the next version, we have a much better story for proxy servers. I'm waiting to figure out what that truly means, but hopefully they have fixed this problem. They know it is a problem for a lot of people, but having the no_proxy allows me to work through that. It also doesn't run in offline and airplane mode. They have a WebSocket that's doing something behind the scenes, that when I'm in airplane mode, that's why there's some videos built into this presentation. We weren't sure we were going to have internet at all here. Last year they had no internet. In airplane mode, it just gives me a blank white screen. You don't even get to see the Cypress test runner. It's just a totally white screen, no errors other than you got a disconnected WebSocket. So unfortunately, it doesn't run in offline, which normally is not a huge deal. There's only a few times where you actually have to worry about that, like instances like this, in a movie theater where you have limited internet. So what might stop you from actually using this? Because it's really not the software anymore. But testing is still hard. Testing is hard from a culture standpoint. Convincing businesses, why do we actually need this? It's great for us as developers. We automatically know it's going to save us time. It's going to make it easier for us to do releases. We're going to have more confidence. That's not where the business is at. The business needs to get something out the door. Telling them it's going to take them 1.5 to 2 times longer to get the same thing out the door because now you're doing testing. They're like, we don't want that. We need stuff out the door faster. You got to change and start talking to the businesses in the business mindset. Hey, if we start doing this, our customers aren't going to be so angry. You might even get some new customers out of this. We're going to be able to release faster, ultimately, and we're not going to have any regressions, so customers aren't going to get mad every new release. If you start talking in the business mindsets, they start perking up a little bit. Those are the conversations that's moved my team forward with management to get approval. Even with our approval, we're still about 4 months in to trying to get it consistently part of our releases, consistently part of every sprint. It takes time to actually get there, baby steps. But every single time I do a new feature, I put a couple more tests in there. Every time I fix a bug, I put a couple more tests in there. It's growing over time. Because it takes time to make that culture change, to convince other developers as well, we should do this thing. It should be part of our check-ins. Developers typically don't like to do testing. Even though I'm excited to do this, my team's excited technically to do it, it's just more work. It takes time to change that culture around. It takes time to get good at writing tests. And don't take the all or nothing approach. That's probably the number one thing I see teams try to do, and it causes them to fail. They go, hey, we're going to take 2 sprints, we're going to do nothing but test cases. Well, what happens if at the end of the 2 sprints you didn't finish all your test cases? Do you throw out the previous 2 sprints worth of stuff because you didn't finish all of them? No. As well, it's rare that businesses are going to give you 2 sprints, and if they do, chances are they're not going to give you time again for another 6 months, and then you're going to do 2 sprints again. Build it up over time. It's not an all or nothing. So let's check back in here with Bill. Let's see how we're doing. We've had a few releases. It says we have some automated tests. Let's see where we're at. Remember, Bill was really grumpy when we first started out. We want Bill to be happy like this. See where he's at. Hey, Bill, we're checking to see how we're doing. Oh, it's been amazing. I'm actually getting features so fast now, and with minimal bugs. I'm not losing money any longer. Let's do more business together. This is what you want your clients to do, and Cypress allows us to get there, and get there pretty darn quickly. So what I want you guys to do on Monday, install Cypress on your applications. Get it at least set up. Take the hour that it takes to actually do the NPM install and run it for the first time with that npx Cypress open. At least get the example test on there. And then write your first test for your application. Pick something simple. Look to see, is a menu item there with maybe the href actually has the right attribute on it. And on all the code that I've shown, I'm going to give you the link in a bit, so you're going to have a lot of examples that you can actually base your stuff on. Add it to your DevOps pipeline. Get Cypress running in there. Even if it's just the example test, at least it's running. You've got that stuff set up. If you get stuck, tweet at me. My Twitter handle's in the footer, DigitalDrummerJ. Tweet at me. Let me see if I can get you unstuck. If I don't have the answer to it, I'll involve the Cypress team. We can ask them questions. We can get this going. A couple additional resources. Their documentation is fantastic. When I started out, literally I lived in their docs. Copy and pasting out of their docs. Oh, I want to look at location. Copy, paste the location content. Lots of examples in there. I showed the kitchen sink example, example.cypress.io. Once I found that opened up a whole new world. Because it's not just docs, it's just examples with some code comments. So I didn't have to actually read the docs. I just had to go to the section that I wanted and copy and paste. All the code that I showed is on my GitHub repo. So github.com/digitaldrummerj, you'll see an Angular tutorial code repository. There's a chapter in there. There's a ton of chapters in there. The particular one you want is chapter-UI-test. That has all the Cypress tests set up. You literally pull down that branch, do an npm install, and then you can run all of the Cypress tests. If you want to follow up with me afterwards, digitaldrummerj.me is my website. DigitalDrummerJ on Twitter. I'm also on Twitch. My goal is to live stream at least once a week, if not twice a week, about stuff like Cypress. There's 6 live streams right now as I walk through Cypress, creating the demo that you guys actually saw. I live streamed it I was doing. There's like 6 videos on that on Twitch, DigitalDrummerJ. Then my company website is letyournerdbeheard.com. We have a few minutes left for any additional questions, anything on Slack. So I'm hearing nothing on Slack. Anything in the room? Have I used other testing frameworks like Test Cafe or WebDriver.io? I have not used those. I have always shied away from the web testing because of Selenium. I have tried it out multiple times. Angular has Protractor built in, which is Selenium-based, but it was tough to create those things. It was slow to create stuff, and so we have stayed away from all of those tools. It was just too tough to convince my team that we should go do it. Every demo I ran, they went, this looks like a lot of work. This looks like a lot of not fun work, and I don't want to do it, and my QA team's not a development team. And so they were even more like, nope, I don't want to be a developer. So we haven't looked at this. Cypress was the first time I actually showed stuff to my team where they actually went, this is really cool. We actually want to do this. Even my UI guy was shockingly excited. I've worked with him like 18 years across like 10 teams. I was always the one pushing, hey, we should do testing. We should at least write down what our tests are. And he's like, I don't want to do any of that work. Now he's at least excited to do this work. So we've stuck with Cypress because of that. Other questions? If you do think of any other questions, go ahead and throw them on Slack. I am part of the Slack channel. Even after the conference, I will get to them. You can also tweet out at me again at DigitalDrummerJ. Thank you for the time, and hopefully you're all staying for the movie.